Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased today to have Dr. Richard Shuster on the show. He's a clinical psychologist and host of the podcast, The Daily Helping. We met at PodFest, which is a fabulous podcasting conference in Orlando, and I thought your story is really fascinating. And also, this is just a great time to talk about mental health, transformation, what can we do when we're struggling. So thanks so much for being a guest, first of all. And I'd love if you could share just a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the heart of the story.
Laura, it is very great to be here. It was wonderful meeting you. A part of me, my heart feels sad when you mentioned Podfest, because I'm like, man, that was only 3 weeks ago from when we recorded this, but it feels like another lifetime ago. And
yeah, things have changed so fast. It's kind of like shocking, but also it's makes the passage of time, because that feels like eons ago.
It really does. It really does. And it's interesting, right? Because we often mark periods of our lives. We compartmentalize. Our brains are very good at compartmentalizing information. And so, basically I've compartmentalized apparently everything from 3 weeks ago and back is the old days. And now everything is new again, but it is good to be here. And I think the show that you host and the work that you're doing is so important, especially now, because people are at a place where they're getting bombarded with information, much of it wrong. The news media cycle is really designed to sell advertising, and the way they sell more ads is to keep you engaged, and the way they keep you engaged is to keep you terrified. And so it's there's a responsibility and a privilege for people who have shows like yours and like mine to really help and elevate and lift people up in many ways as we can. So I think, though, you did ask me a little bit about my background and my story. And so I have kind of a ridiculous story in the sense that I remember very clearly on my last day of undergraduate, so I'm like 22, 23 years old, having a beer with my friends, boldly, if not arrogantly, proclaiming I would never set foot in a classroom ever again for the rest of my life because I hate school. And now 2 masters and a doctorate later, how wrong young version of me was. But my journey was weird in the sense that, I went down this path of really focusing on things that I'm not focusing on now. I really, really worked hard to build an empire. And that's what I would tell people. I would tell people I'm building the Shuster empire. And I was going to be the next Bill Gates. And I would come home from work and get on eBay, and I would look up islands for sale that I could name after myself. And
oh my goodness.
And I know, and right. And as your listeners are hearing this, you're like, well, this guy's a total jerk. And why did you have him on your show? And I kind of was, though. I wasn't focused on really balance and wellness. I was just focused on the acquisition of stuff for the sake of having stuff. And I got, in a lot of ways, really lucky, where I bid on a contract with the Department of Defense in my mid-20s, and I won it. And it wasn't bombs or weapons or missiles or anything like that. It was securing software and creating this pipe that locked down the medical records of the Army between point A, which was in, I think, Maryland, if I recall, and point B, which was in San Antonio, Texas. And so that was my world. And I was building this until one day I was in a really crazy car accident where a 17-year-old kid went screaming through a light. And I had already been kind of in the middle of my left-hand turn. So you can imagine how this goes. That the car was going full speed. And then there was this moment where I just saw it, and everything kind of froze for me. And I'd love to say that it was like a Christmas carol, and I was like, dear God, if you let me live, tomorrow I'm going to give orphan boys and girls presents all over, it wasn't like that at all. I knew I was dead. And so as this car is screaming at me and slams into me, sends me into oncoming traffic where the next car hits me, and then I'm sent back the other way, ultimately into a telephone pole, maybe 3 seconds goes by, maybe. But that moment felt like an eternity to me. And so now that I have all those fun degrees and I've studied the brain a bit, I understand that there's a lot of research around what happens in the brain when we are really believing we're about to die. And not like coronavirus, like we might go outside and pick up a piece of mail and, touch our face and then go through this disease. Like, I'm talking like you're going to get shot, a comet's going to hit you, a saber-toothed tiger is going to eat you, like that kind of I'm about to die. So that whole period for me felt like an eternity, in which time slowed down, like Neo in the Matrix. I know you like movie references.
Yes.
So like things where I could see my windshield shatter, like it was in slow motion. Little pieces of my windshield are floating in the air, and I can see the sunlight refracting off of it. And I can see my center console crushing into my side like an empty can of Coke, but I don't feel any pain. I'm just watching all this happen. And I'm having this full-on conversation with myself about, I'm about to die. And what kind of life have I lived? And how ashamed I was that my parents were going to get this call that I was dead. And I was reflecting on the watch that I was wearing and the car that I was driving, and knowing these things weren't coming with me to the other side. Like I was dead, and all my material stuff and all of these things that I was really focused on having were for naught. And so that began a journey, which eventually was a shift for me towards wanting to really help make a difference in our lives. But I think it's, an interesting analogy to what's going on right now in the world, Laura, is that, we are now, many of us are out of work, or we're doing things that we weren't expecting to do at all. And we don't see what the consequences or the potential of that 5, 10 months, 10 years down the road is. We just are in the now. So after I had my car accident and I went back to work, and I eventually left that company. I walked away from it. And I was terrified, and I was depressed, and I was lamenting, what was I going to do with my life? I've let all these people down. I told them I was going to build this thing. And one day I went to the grocery store, and I overheard these two women who were freaking out because their teenage daughters were on MySpace. This kind of tells you how long ago that was.
Right.
Right. And so that's right, in the MySpace era. So I interjected in their conversation because, I had all this what I thought to be useless technical knowledge from my computer company. And they got really excited. It's a little terrified, but like excited that somebody was sharing this information. And they asked me to come speak at their PTA event. And that kicked off a sequence of events that led me to ultimately do what I'm doing right now. So if you're listening to this and you're absolutely terrified, know that in the end, there is going to be a path that's kind of comes through for all of us that really helps us come out of this better than we were, even if we don't see it now. And I joke about it when I go on shows. I say, if Instacart had existed back then, I don't know what I'd be doing, because I had to go to the grocery store. But right, I go to the grocery store. I happen to be in that exact aisle at that exact time, and that conversation really sparked what has now become this almost 20-year journey of helping people become the best versions of themselves that wouldn't probably have happened if it had gone down any other way.
Yeah, I think there is an incredible realignment that's happening for people right now, and things being taken away that we might perceive to be bad. And in many cases, our perception of what is good we can have is very relative. So if you'd asked me before the recession, before my sort of life fell apart, if I was happy, I would have said, yeah, I'm happy. And now I'm like, gosh, I was miserable. I was miserable in that other time, in that other life that I had, because that's all I knew. But it's, it seemed good enough. And it was only in retrospect that I realized in what bad shape that I was in many different ways. And I think that's going to be the case for a lot of people right now, where there's a realignment happening. They don't know how they're going to get to wherever they're going, but doors will open. And, whether it's Instacart or a grocery store or, whatever, there will be, however it is, the universe has amazing ways of getting us to connect and align with whatever we need to. So just to trust that process. And same thing for me, when I started my business, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I just literally started interviewing people, started sending emails about things that helped me heal. I couldn't really even perceive where I was going. It was just like this drive to just do something, and just follow that drive, whatever that is.
That resonates. It resonates really powerfully with me, Laura. And in fact, I was thinking back to my own story, is that ultimately I just became so physically ill was ultimately when I walked away from my company.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was like they were going to send me to an infectious disease specialist because nobody could figure out medically what was wrong with me. But my body was breaking down because I just was so stressed and just so unhappy with where I was in my life. And when I decided finally, and that's really what motivates people to make change a lot of times, is it's fear. It's fear or it's pain.
Yeah.
And so
Pain is
when the
yeah.
pain is significant enough, I need to restate that. Fear is what keeps us from taking action. It's the pain, the level of pain becomes severe enough to where we want to make a shift in our lives. And so, it's awesome that you said what you said, because for a lot of people right now, like, they are fearful and they don't know what to do next. But
Yeah.
it's so important that we recognize the connection between mental health and between, what's going on in our environment, and how we handle stress, because it can impact us in so many different ways, and none of them are good.
Yeah, and I think when we're being guided to step forward, to me, it's like, I think a lot of people expect it to be like, I see the path laid before me and that's where I'm going. Where actually it's like, you see the one step and you take the step and then the next step appears. And that's really scary, to step into that like unknown, like, I don't even know where this is going. I'm just feeling to do what? Like, you felt like to go talk to the people from the grocery store. And so that's hard, but that's what I found, the way that it works. And the other thing I want to share is, from a spiritual perspective, our bodies are communicating things with us. And if this is, I think, is really fascinating, it may seem kind of intense for some people, but if we are spiritually unaligned enough and for a long period of time, we will die. Our bodies will get ill to say like, hey, you're off, you're not listening, something needs to be realigned. And if we don't listen, basically our spirit is like, time to do over. We got to start again. We're not doing what we came here to do. And basically we die. And that's not always the way why death occurs. Sometimes death occurs for completely, different reasons spiritually, but that can happen. So for me, I was on this like politics path, and it was like, no, no, no. And if I just kept trying to push into that, I really feel that I eventually would have just gotten cancer and died or something, because it was just not aligned for me to do that. So let's talk about kind of where you are now and what you do, because I think that's really fascinating.
So, I'll jump forward a number of years, that when I made that shift and started doing things that were in alignment for me, doors started magically opening up. And I still wasn't in a space where I would have ever considered graduate school. But what I was doing was, I was going around and I was speaking about how to protect your kids online. So I was doing like the internet safety circuit, so to speak, where I was living. And I had this opportunity where I was at a school, and a guidance counselor came up to me and said, hey, would you consider being a mentor? Which is something I'd never done before. And so they said to me, we have lots of female mentors, but no males. And I was working with a kid who was in the 7th grade, and I got to keep him in the 7th and 8th grade. And I'm not so arrogant now as to say that I was the reason his life turned around, but I was part of that change process. And that felt really, really cool. And somebody said to me, well, you thought about going back to graduate school. And so, I hear that voice, like the angel and the devil on the shoulder from Animal House. Like, I heard the 23-year-old me, like with the beer in my hand, saying, you're never going to graduate school. And then this other one who was thinking about possibilities I'd never considered before, saying, well, what if? What if I went to graduate school? And so I did, and got a master's in social work. And I worked with Hurricane Katrina victims during that training, which was so powerful. Put things in perspective in a way that I had never been able to have things in perspective. And then wanted to continue down the path, and went after my doctorate in clinical psychology, where I had advanced training in forensic and neuropsychology, and went out into the world and became a psychologist. And for a while thought, well, this is it. This is what I went to school. I'm on my new path. And then I still felt like something's missing. Something's not right. And it was just this, it was like in my intuition just telling me you're supposed to be doing something else.
Right.
And so I just, whether this idea just popped in my head, or, somebody put that out there and I picked up on it, I decided to do a podcast. And so, knowing what I know about neuroscience, and my actual dissertation was on the impact that social media has on personality functioning, and not in a good way. So, I kept thinking about, that we're kind of a selfie generation. Listen, if you're listening to this, I am not anti Instagram or Facebook or any of these things. Everything has good and bad. And, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. but there are downsides to these things, and that I think people need to know about them. And so it bothered me how we were just so focused on the selfies. And what people don't realize is that if I took any two people listening to this show and put them in a room, and person A received $1,000 and person B gave somebody else $1,000, and I had real-time neurodiagnostic imaging hardware hooked up to their brains so I could see what was going on, the same mechanisms are firing, the same parts of the brains are lighting up. And what all that means is that we are biologically hardwired to feel good when we help other people, period. But we're not focused on that as a society. And so I thought about that and I said, well, how can I sneak that into my show in some way? And I didn't really want to do a neuroscience show because that's boring. And I knew I wasn't going to have a large reach. And if you're listening to this and you like neuroscience and I offended you, I'm terribly sorry. But I mean, I wanted to do something that would have a much broader impact. And so I came upon the concept of having this broad personal development show where I interviewed a wide range of people, from people who have incredibly inspirational stories that have become, influencers, to, people that are luminaries in, finance and medicine. And so just daily helping, just things that if somebody listened to that show that they could implement and be better than they were the day before. And my call to action is called our hashtag My Daily Helping movement, where I encourage people to commit acts of kindness and post it in their social media feeds every day using the hashtag My Daily Helping. And that's where I was able to put a little bit of that neuroscience in there, because I know that if people do that every single day, if you do something kind for somebody else without asking or expecting anything in return every day, and you do this for 30 days, I guarantee you're going to feel really good. And it's biologically proven, it's scientifically proven that when we do things for other people, there is a physiological benefit to our bodies as well as an emotional benefit.
I do think that is incredibly powerful. I do want to give the one caveat that if you were always giving to other people, then sometimes you have to kind of switch that and do it yourself, back to yourself. And I find that we're learning different lessons, and some people are learning to help others more, and some people are learning to give themselves love. And it's important to be loving to all, including yourself. But focusing on one too much, regardless of which one it is, it creates imbalances, and bad things happen in the body, etc. So we're living in an incredibly unique time right now. As we're recording this, we're in the midst of the Corona lockdown. It remains to be seen exactly where we'll be when this is released, because things are shifting so quickly.
Yes.
In terms of even just a month ago, like we were saying, it was a very different world. But regardless, I think there's going to be some lasting impacts from coronavirus that are happening for people. And I think mental health is one of those areas that is certainly being impacted by people, that it's bringing up feelings of isolation, certainly, worry, stress, anxiety. So what coping mechanisms or tools can you share that would be helpful for people during this unusually stressful time?
Yeah, when we think about stress, we think about stress scientifically in a couple of ways. And stress, a lot of people associate it as always a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. Stress can actually be a really good thing. It can motivate us to leave a bad relationship or quit a job that's making us unhappy. Can motivate us to get in shape more so than we had been in the past. So stress isn't always bad. This kind of stress is bad. And the reason it's bad is because a lot of times we're able to define a stressor from a beginning, middle, and an end. And in this instance, we're all in uncharted territory. We have, like you said, maybe this airs in a month and we'll see what things are like. It seems like, from what the experts are saying in virology and epidemiology, that we're still going to be locked down a month from now. And if I'm wrong and it turns into a meme, awesome. But I don't think so. I think in May and maybe even into June and July, we may still be sitting in our homes, and that's scary. And so that what we really need to focus on is what wellness means to you and what wellness means to me, because it means different things to every person. So for me, and I learned this week, cooking is my zen. I've always had a really hard time like closing my eyes and meditating and, you know, getting into this like zen like state. My mind is like the hamster in the wheel, and it just doesn't do that. But I'm in a state of flow when I'm chopping vegetables and searing things in a pan. Like that's how I chill out. And so if you're listening to this, you know, meditation's awesome. So I'm not, you know, I love meditation. But everybody has their own way of finding that kind of inner peace. And really, it's just simply a question of, if you don't know what it is, you probably do, but don't realize you know what it is. And it's simply the question you can ask yourself is, you know, if you were to snap your fingers and there was no coronavirus, you didn't have any financial concerns, you didn't have any familial obligations, you just got to do whatever you wanted to do right now, what would it be? If it's jet skiing and skydiving, you're probably screwed.
Right.
But if it's listening to music, if it's dancing, if it's poetry or arts and crafts, like that's what you should be building into your schedule right now, at least once per day, to do something you really enjoy. The other thing that I think we lose sight of is there are opportunities all around us right now, silver linings. And so I was remarking the other day, you know, I have two kids and they're doing their distance learning just like everybody else. And my 5-year-old had a lesson where he had to learn about measuring stuff. And so it was 12 o'clock on a Monday where we're pulling out flour and we're baking banana bread and making a big mess and learning this is half a cup and this is a quarter of a cup and this is a teaspoon. And like we're doing this and I'm thinking to myself, man, like there's no universe in any other set of circumstances where on a Monday afternoon, I would be baking with my kid. Never.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I'm a big fan of having a gratitude practice. There's a ton of research around what happens when you stay in a positive mindset. And so, yes, the world is in a very uncertain place. And no, we don't have a vaccine, but we will. And so between now and then, focus every day. And I would start your day with this, and I would end your day with this if you're listening to this. Write down 3 unexpected things that happened that were really cool. And pick up the phone a couple times a week and reach out to somebody that you haven't talked to in a very long time, somebody that's important to you, that because of all the busyness and all of the craziness in our lives, the day-to-day, the taking kids to carpool, the soccer, this, the that, all that's over now. And everybody's just sitting at home looking for reassurance and looking for love. Pick up the phone and call somebody. I actually have made lists. Like I have lists of people that I haven't talked to in at least 6 months, and I've been working my way down the list. Not just with a Facebook message, but I'm actually calling them. You know, one of the things that social media has done is it's dehumanized a lot of things, I think, and taken away a lot of the value. You know, it used to be before Facebook, if you had a birthday and somebody called you on your birthday, that meant something, right? It actually meant that you remembered the birthday. You took time out of your day to say, hey, you know, I was thinking about you. How are you? Happy birthday. Now all we have to do is just click a little like button, or right, or it automatically tells us just wish them a happy birthday. So, you know, to be able to reach out to somebody that you haven't connected with and share something, share the catch up, how are you, reassure them, like that's a powerful thing, and that's good for you and that's good for the other person. Another thing that I would really encourage everybody to do as much as possible is keep your TV off.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, I think that's like number one. TV, and not just TV, but
the news. The news suck. Yeah.
News and scrolling through social media, because a lot of social media now is posting of the news. So yeah.
You know, there are certain times to watch the news to get information you need to survive. If you live in a floodplain and there's a Category 5 hurricane coming towards you, you should probably turn on the news so that you have an idea of when you need to evacuate and where and how much time you have.
Yeah.
But this coronavirus is not like that. If you watch the news at 8 o'clock in the morning, what's going on that particular day is going to be no different at 6 o'clock in the afternoon in terms of the actual virus itself. But yet then it's set up in such a way that they want you watching it all day long. And I know people, like I've heard from people who have been watching CNN from morning to night, and they are miserable, they are stressed, they are drinking, they are doing all of these things. We don't allow it in our house, like I just don't turn it on. And it's number one, you'll be amazed how much more time you have in your life if you're able to do that. But I mean, there are physiological things that happen when we're stressed, that if you continue to inundate yourself with sources of stress, you increase the likelihood of really bad things. And not that watching the news is going to cause you to have a stroke or a seizure, but it increases that risk. Your immune system is actually decreased significantly when you're under stress.
Hugely.
Your ability to fight off those illnesses goes way, way down when you're under stressed. And
and now's the time we should have as much immunity as we can. So
yes, for sure. And the other thing that I would encourage people to do more than they've ever done is exercise. That's another thing that is really good for the immune system, and it's really good for your overall emotional well-being. And so, that doesn't mean if you don't have a home gym that you're screwed. It means that you can do push-ups, you can do sit-ups. My kids have discovered this like kids yoga, and they do all these like episodes based on Star Wars and Disney movies and stuff. And it's a little silly and hokey, but it's still getting the body moving and something that you could do and should do. I mean, everybody should come out of this in better shape physically than they were before this started.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the news. I think this is really important because I feel like what we put our focus on from a sort of energetic and spiritual perspective it expands, and when we are in fear and stress, we draw more of that to us, and we also see things from that lens. I have found it's good to just, I do check in periodically, see what's going on, not necessarily watching the news, but, check in on social media. And then there's a podcast I like where I listen to just like daily news briefing kind of thing. And aside from that, I try to tune it out. And I have found that whatever way you can right now, because that varies for certain people, just to incorporate nature or the outdoors. So maybe that's just opening your door or your window, or it's going to a park, or, again, we all have varying access, but it's amazing how nature really just helps us feel so grounded.
Well, there's a good amount of science on that too, Laura.
I believe it. Yeah. I mean, I've heard of, tree bathing and things like that, but basically going out in nature, it just literally, or earthing where you, stick your feet in the ground, these are kind of more extreme, but just literally having the fresh air. Even there was a study I was reading about how just having fresh air, that's one of the bad things about hospitals right now is they all are closed systems. People aren't even getting fresh air. Just that alone is huge. But I'd love to hear about any particular studies or references that you have.
Well, there's a couple that come to mind. Actually, one of the things that I got pretty lucky with early on in my podcast was NBC found out about me, and then they started asking me all kinds of things about the brain.
Oh, awesome.
And so one of the things they wanted me to help them with was what happens to our brains when we go to the beach. But it's very similar to what happens to our brains when we go into a forest or we climb a mountain. So there's actually systems that kind of reset, and our brains get almost I don't want to say thrown, because that's really the wrong analogy, but it's almost like a switch gets flipped and we go into almost a semi-meditative kind of state when we're at the beach in particular. And there's a number of reasons for this. One, there's negative ions which are produced from the surf that comes in and out. Of course, this is ocean. This is not freshwater, but there's still something that's very soothing to us from a rhythmic standpoint. Water in and out, repetitive sounds that happen to us. A bird, the sound of the waves crashing on the shore. These are things that just naturally, whether we're even aware of it or not, kind of subconsciously calm us down, soothe us down. They have hooked up some of those real-time imaging sensors and EEGs to people's brains when they're at the beach, and the frequencies of which their brains are functioning are actually different than if you were to go into the city or in your apartment or wherever. So being in nature is physiologically very, very good for us.
Yeah, and I think if you don't have access to that right now, because a lot of beaches and things are closed, or you're not geographically in a place where you can do that, I think even listening to, meditation sounds or nature sounds or something, still that's it can still bring you to that place. And so we all can access that, wherever we are. Insight Timer is an app that I like where you can do that. You can just search nature sounds or different meditations. It's free. One other thing I want to bring up as it relates to news that I think you were addressing is that it's very fear-based, because the more eyeballs that are on there, the more ads they sell. And one of the things when this all was starting to unfold was it was driving me crazy, because everything was like worst case scenario. Like literally they'd say the highest projections are millions of people are going to die, and I there was no one that was saying like, here's like the low end, here's the high end, and probably we're going to be somewhere in between. It was everything was saying like, this is the worst case. And because we're wired to preserve our own life, and sometimes in history stress meant something dangerous to avoid to protect our life, we are oriented to focus on the fear, and that drives me crazy in terms of media. So another reason to disengage. But can you talk a little bit about that mechanism from a clinical health perspective?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. And so from a cognitive behavior framework, what we talk about is catastrophizing. And that's basically our brains automatically going into this place of what is the worst thing that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when you have a news cycle, that's basically putting it up in big, scary graphics. And it's always interesting. Like if you are paying attention during times of war, like everyone can kind of like hum the James Earl Jones, "This is CNN." Like he had his music right behind him. Like everyone can kind of remember what that was like. But they have special music that they're using during disasters, during hurricanes, during this virus. And it's not the normal music. It's like the impending doom soundtrack from a Tom Cruise movie where somebody's about to blow up. And so you none of this is by accident. And I'm not putting on a tinfoil hat here. I'm just telling you what is done, because it's called emotional priming. So what the news media does through auditory, sensory type information like music, through scary, big in your face visual headlines and graphics, they sensationalize and they terrify. And so that is those two things emotionally prime you to want to hang on, because, oh my God, what do I need to know? Because it's the worst case scenario. And so what happens is, from a biological standpoint, is that there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdalic response is really all about fear. And so if you've ever watched Mad Men, they figured this out a long time ago, like in the 50s, is that if you're able to connect with somebody's emotional centers, you're going to get them to remember what's going on more. So that's how the advertising agency started learning that things like fear, outcome-based fear, like if you don't do X, you're going to end up alone, or if you do Y, you're going to
use mouthwash, or you can't find a love interest,
right.
or get
Like
married.
like how many toothpaste commercials? Think about toothpaste commercials. This is so good, right? Like they're beautiful couples in bed together, and it's it's all about the fear of being alone. And for some people, or the fear of not having enough, or whatever. But it's all fear based, and so when we associate an emotion to something, it actually encodes differently in our brain, and we remember it more positive, or more, not positive, we remember it more strongly than if it was just rote facts. Like if you had a list of things you had to buy at the store, and you looked at the list and you're like, oh, I need zucchini and eggs and whatever. You might or you might not remember all that, or you might forget something off the list. This is why treating trauma of people who have suffered horrible events like rape, or they've been held at gunpoint, or they've survived a fire, what have you, that's why those are so much harder to treat, because the brain encodes those into the part where you have that emotional aspect. And so really that's what's happening when you're watching the news. It is priming you into a state of fear. And so what I would encourage everybody who's listening to this to do is there's a couple of techniques that you can do that are really helpful. And one is called fear journaling, or fear tracking, but it's the same thing. Where basically what you're doing is you're writing what caused the fear, what you were thinking. So you kind of have 3 columns on a piece of paper. You can do this on your phone or tablet, whatever. You have 3 columns. And the first column is what was going on in that moment? What was the precipitating event that caused the fear? And then what the next column was what was going through your mind right after that happened or while that was happening. So the actual thoughts. Then the thought could be, I'm going to get coronavirus, or I'm never going to get out of my house, or my loved one's going to get it and die, like whatever that is. And then the next column is what was the response? Did you start getting sweaty palms, or your heart start beating really fast? And so you're able to start really seeing patterns in yourself. And I encourage people to do this during non-pandemic situations. Like we're all afraid of something. And it's really helpful to be able to start seeing patterns, because when it's on paper and you can see over the course of, say, 2 weeks that similar things are kind of triggers for you, that's really helpful to know. And then the other thing to do, I talked about that we do a lot of catastrophizing, and we do, and we're wired that way. But one of the things that you can do as a technique that's really helpful, that is often used in cognitive behavior therapy, is to ask yourself, start challenging that with questions. How likely is that to happen? What is really the worst case scenario if I have to be home another 3 weeks? And you start essentially diffusing these fears. What's another way of looking at that? What might be some positive thing that can happen for me being home with my family for 6 weeks? And and when you start getting the brain, and this is your prefrontal cortex, your executive functioning, your higher reasoning skills, when you start engaging those, what it does is it pulls you out of that ancient amygdala, that old system of fear and survival. Because basically, like I said, it's a saber-toothed tiger thing. I mean, those are ancient mammalian processes that have been in place, that basically if you were the caveman with the spear and you saw a giant woolly mammoth or something, that you got a trigger to say, get the hell out of there. And so
run from the fear, get away from whatever is triggering the fear, because your life could literally be in danger, like right now.
That's right. And so, but we are not designed as human beings to be able to really successfully tolerate chronic, unending fear. We're just not.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have to really consciously pull ourselves out of those patterns. I think that journaling exercise, kind of tracking it, is really helpful. The other thing that I've been finding very helpful for me is to focus on creativity, doing something creative. I feel like, again, that just switches which part of the brain is most active, because it's hard to be in fear when you're making a drawing, or I don't know, whatever. I think that's why coloring for some people is
very therapeutic.
Because it just, your brain suddenly, it's like, oh wait, I have to do this other thing, and it shifts where the focus and energy in the brain is. So I've been doing a lot of creative work right now, writing, and recently started doing channeled painting, which is quite fun. So I do feel that this is also an incredible time to channel that creativity. Basically, just choose where that energy is going. Are you watching the news all the time and being pulled into that fear pattern, or are you spending, like you mentioned, spending time with your family, doing something, meaningful, creating? I think that's a really, really wonderful tip. So this has been really great. Do you have any other, kind of words to share, stories, helpful tips?
I just want to comment on what you had just said, because I think there's an important point to be made from it, is that it's impossible for us to be in two opposite emotional states at the same time.
Yeah.
You can't be in a state of gratitude and have a scarcity mindset at the same time. It's impossible. You can't be really, really happy and really, really angry at the same time. Like we just can't do it. And so choose to find peace, choose to find happiness, choose to find the silver linings right now that each and every one of us can engage in wherever we are. And whether we're stuck in a home with 15 people, or whether we're by ourselves, there's something that we can engage in every day that'll bring meaning, balance, and happiness to our lives.
I'm so with you. And I think that there's so much opportunity here for us. We're being guided to release things. And you mentioned in your story about how, we're focusing on accumulating more and more physically, materially, and then you had this kind of reset point. And I think this will serve as a reset point for a lot of people. And also, wherever you are, even if you think you're in a bad place, when you really look at us in perspective of the world, if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably top 1,000%, even with things, maybe being in a poor economy and everything, just because we have clean water, we have a safe home, we have food to eat, we have computers and technology that we're working on. So I think it's a really great time to focus on that gratitude and what we do have versus what we don't have. And also, there are so many resources. We were kind of chit-chatting before we started recording about, if this was happening 15 years ago, how much harder it would have been in so many ways. Like, we can still run business, we can still connect, we can see each other, through video chat. You can watch movies and television at home. Like, there's so many amazing things that if we just really appreciate. And also, sometimes it's just a little bit of thinking out of the box in terms of our goals or what we want to accomplish. So I've been working on some music in the music studio in London, and obviously I can't go, not able to go to the music studio in London right now. But before we were doing the session, I was working on some music with that same studio remotely, so that's great. There's so many things. If you just think of like a way to do it, it's likely that there is a solution, and not to just think you have to stop whatever you're doing, unless you want to. Maybe you want to stop. Maybe this is, again, like, I don't want to work on that anymore. But if you do want to work on something or continue moving forward, there is a way to do it, and not to give up, and just be really perseverant about it.
Very well said. I love that.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. This has been such a pleasure. If people want to learn more, connect with you, your podcast, your website, whatever, please feel free to share.
Sure. So kind of the mothership is drrichardschuster.com, and you can spell it any way you want. I bought every domain combination, but it's drrichardshuster.com. And if you want to check out the podcast, although it's linked to my main page, it's thedailyhelping.com.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think the podcast is incredible. You have some wonderful guests. I hear you have a really superstar guest coming on. Do you want to share that?
I don't, just in case it doesn't happen.
Okay.
No, but
have some high-profile people, which is really awesome.
I will say this: I've been very, very privileged to have some incredible people who have come on the show. People that 3 years ago were heroes of mine that I would read books about, and man, wouldn't it be cool to meet so and so? And now they've become colleagues and in many instances friends. And the commonality, though, of everybody who comes on my show is everybody who's a guest on my show is committed to sharing their stories and experience towards helping make the world a better place. And I think that's the thread, just like your show. Your show is all about wellness and bringing light into people's lives. And so that's what you need to be surrounding yourself with right now. Good content like this podcast. And if you do that, it makes it much more bearable. Nobody's having fun in the coronavirus world, but there's ways to be able to adapt and change. And I like what you said as well, Laura, that this is a reset. I think this is going to be a reset for humanity. And I'm really hopeful.
The earth, healing.
And we need it. And so I'm really hopeful that when we come out of this, and we will come out of this, that a lot of people continue to focus on those things that are really important and less so on things that are just noise.
Yeah, and I even think there are ways to creatively have fun. Like I actually with Allison Melody, who I think you have at least met at Podfest, we had a virtual karaoke the other night, which
That's
was
so
really
cool.
fun.
You guys love your karaoke, boy, I'll tell you what.
We do. Yeah, but there again, with creative solutions, there are ways to have fun and do a lot of the things. Well, this has been so fun, Dr. Richard. I'm really glad we were able to make this work and that we connected in Orlando. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
It's been a pleasure, Laura. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me on Twitter at @LauraPowers, Instagram at LauraPowers44, and on Facebook at Healing Powers.